Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 19th of December of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And the most important updates and numbers are coming from Moscow, from the Ministry of Defense, where the Russians have some certain meetings that involved some, like the highest officers of Russian Federation and President of Russian Federation Vladimir Putin. They were talking a lot, and basically they were made a report for the results of the special military operation and just of the military sphere of Russian Federation for the 2023. A lot of very interesting updates, just few numbers and my thoughts about these numbers. The most important number is that according to the Ministry of Defense, Ukraine has currently received 203 billion from external sponsors, which is 30 billion more than GDP. In fact, this is in bankrupt countries, since the significant part of these funds are loans that must be repaid. And this is probably the most important note. Most of the people haven't paid attention to this number, but I paid because I have some financial background, and I'll give you my own opinion. First of all, the Western sources and the Ukrainians are saying that the Western states took a decision to stop funding Ukraine because of problems on the ground, that they were defeated during the greatest counteroffensive operation, that Ukrainians can't win Russia on the ground, and many different fairy tales. But just from the basic investments, this in finance, science and so on, the Ukrainians received exactly the same amount of money as they can produce. And what does it mean? Not just as they can produce, but produce and to return. So basically, the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation tried to tell us that the problem is not the situation on the ground. This is the real war. How? Explain me, how do the Western countries can rely just on one battle on the south and to win the entire big Russia? Obviously, it doesn't work like this. The Ukrainians received exactly the amount of money they can produce with their economy. And now the Western sponsors, Western investors understand that if they continue give Ukrainians money, and they can give them money, of course they do have money, they understand that this money, according to the current level of production in Ukraine, will be returned not even the next year, but maybe even in hundreds of years. Maybe the grandsons and granddaughters will return money that you give Ukrainians today. And obviously this is not a very good thing for the Western investors. This level of support can be supplied and supported just by countries, by governments, like the government of the United States, with no private things, no loans, because it's useless to give loans to the country that can't return these loans ever. And now this is the main problem, and this is the thing that Western countries face. They don't know what to sell in Ukraine. They don't know how to return this money back. This is opinion of the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation. Also, he added that as a result of clashes since the beginning of the Ukrainian counteroffensive operation, greatest Ukrainian counteroffensive operation, they lost around 159,000 soldiers. A very big number of losses since the 1st of June. It's June, July, August, September, October, November, December, around 7 months. And also he added that since the beginning of the special military operation, the Ukrainians lost 383,000 military personnel. So basically, just for 7 months, the Ukrainians lost around 41 of the previous 7 months. The Ukrainians lost 41% of the personnel that's of the total losses. And it's not just because of this. The main idea that you need to understand, that the reason of Ukraine losses is not the Ukrainian greatest counteroffensive operation. The Ukrainian greatest counteroffensive operation ended in August, to be fair enough. In August. They started in June, July, and in the August the offensive operation ended. After that, the Ukrainians tried to make some operations, but the activity intensifying was reducing every single day, step by step. So the main idea of this note is that the Russians during the previous 7 months managed to improve their weapons so much, so high. So the level of losses for the previous 7 months is 41% in the 20 months of clashes during the special, even more. It's of 22 months. So third part, 41%. That means that the level of losses of the Ukrainians will become more and more during the next phases of the special military operation. During these previous 7 months, the Russians improved their production of FPV drones. They start using guided bombs and many other different things, and on the ground and in air and the sea and the water and so on. Zelenskyy today also started something like press conference from his side. And currently, while I'm making this video, he making his speech. He's talking a lot of very interesting thing, but I managed to save just one note and I start making the video. And according to Zelenskyy, the Minister of Defense Zaluzhny asked him to mobilize additional 500,000 soldiers. According to Zelenskyy, he still hasn't approved this number, and I understand Zelenskyy why he hasn't approved, because he understands that Zaluzhny is very powerful. He is too powerful, and Zelenskyy, if he mobilize additional 500,000 people, this 500,000 army will be under control of Zaluzhny. So basically, by mobilization, he will reinforce his position, not his personal. He understands that maybe Ukrainians are no longer able to change the situation on the ground, but he will mobilize another 500,000 that will be under control of Zaluzhny. And if Zaluzhny says, let's make a military coup, these 500,000 will do this. Zelenskyy understands this, and so that's why he wants to push Zaluzhny to step back, or he wants to establish his own man in charge of this 500,000 army. So this is the situation, and we'll see what is going to be next. Now let's move to the situation on the ground, and first we're going to talk about Kherson. The clashes in the village continues. The Russians managed to reduce the foothold of the Ukrainians in this area. Just during the previous 24 hours, we got more details, more videos of FPV drone strikes against the Ukrainians who were trying to get the Krynky area on boats. Most of the boats on the river were destroyed. According to the Ministry of Defense, as a result of clashes in this area, the Ukrainians lost 75 armored soldiers, 3 armored vehicles, 3 artillery systems. So I think that the days of Krynky are numbered, and the Russians took a decision to finish the situation. We see that the situation is very difficult, and nobody can give 100% sure information that if the Russians are able to capture 3-4 towns in a row, let's say Krynky to return the foothold, to establish control over Novomykhailivka, let's say to capture Ivanivske and to capture Sinkovka, I'm not talking about Avdiivka, who can give guarantees that the Ukrainian military authorities will not make military coup and will not turn their tanks and armored vehicles and will not go in direction of Kiev. Nobody can give this guarantee, so that's why the Russians are planning to do all these things at the same time, as I understand. So to make a massive effect by taking off these 4 towns and to collapse not the front line, but first of all the Ukrainian brains, their morale and their spirit, and they're willing to continue special military operation in this war. Now we're moving to Zaporizhzhia area. We have also lots of very interesting details and geolocations. As you can see, most of the geolocations belong to the Russians. I have updated the map because we have a lot of geolocations. The Russians during the previous days, during the previous weeks, were trying to attack the Ukrainians on the western flank of Robotyne, and as a result of those attacks, the Russians managed to cut some piece of cake. They capture a few tree lines, few Ukrainian positions. That was the first area the Russians captured as a result of attack. This was the second area the Russians captured. During the previous few days, the Russians managed to capture this territory under their control and to force the Ukrainians to step back. And today we got update. According to geolocations, the Russians managed to cut another piece of cake in this area and to capture this territory. So as you can see, the Ukrainians step by step, but they're withdrawing their positions. And now the Russians will start the circle from the beginning. The next target will be, let's say, to capture this piece of cake. Then the Russians will take under control the southern part of Robotyne. Maybe then the Russians will try to cut this part of the foothold, and so on. So step by step, small piece by small piece, the Russians will return control over entire Robotyne-Verbovo foothold. As for me, this is obviously. According to the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to repel few attacks of 117th and 118th Mechanized Brigade in the vicinity of Robotyne, and the total loss of the Ukrainians were around 80 soldiers. Now we are moving further to South Donetsk direction. We have a lot of very interesting details and updates from Novomykhailivka. The Russians, as you can see, as a result of very heavy clashes and attack, managed to establish control not just of the cemetery, but also they answered on the using tank convoy this industrial zone. Some sources are saying some, let's say, Syriac map and deep state map also confirms that the Russian progress not just in these farms, but also the Russians managed to establish control over these farms. So significant progress, and basically the Ukrainians withdraw their positions on the southern edge of the village, and currently they try to hold the Russians somewhere on this line. Once again, all these videos that we will take a look right now were made few days ago. Maybe on 11th of December, on 12th or 13th of December. We just received this video right now. So once again, this is the video, the most important scene, this one. This is the cemetery, as you can see, under Russian control, and this is the farms, the first farms that we have geolocations upon, another geolocation. So the Ukrainians probably, there are very high chances that the Ukrainians have already left the eastern part of Novomykhailivka. Maybe the entire Novomykhailivka is already in Russian control, but we still haven't received these updates. We need more time to understand what exactly is happening there and what is going to be next on this direction. So this is the current situation. The Ukrainians from their side published few geolocations as well. For example, on this video we can see the Ukrainian defense belt. This video was made on the 11th of December. Maybe not very happy Ukrainians, maybe very afraid Ukrainians were standing in Novomykhailivka on the edge positions, on the trenches to the south of the village, and according to this man, the Russians launched another offensive operation, and they were getting ready to meet the Russians. At some point the Ukrainian machine gunners start attacking the Russian infantry with machine gun, and so that was the beginning of the battle. Probably that battle ended not in Ukrainian favor, not in the favor of these soldiers, because the Russians managed to bypass this territory and to capture the southern fortifications. Also, we got another geolocation from this interception of roads. The Ukrainians were bombing the Russians with FPV drones, with bombardments. We will not watch video till the end. This is another confirmation of Russian control upon this territory as well. So this is probably the Russian progress. Once again, there are very high chances that the Russians have already entered Novomykhailivka and they have already bypassed Central Street, or let's say Zaporizhzhia Street, and maybe currently the clashes are taking place somewhere in the central part of Novomykhailivka, but yet we haven't received any confirmations or geolocations of that. Probably within the next few days we're going to receive something. Now we are moving to the Avdiivka area. According to the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, as a result of clashes on this territory, the Ukrainians lost 180 soldiers, 7 armored vehicles and 7 artillery systems. The main clashes took place on every single direction: Toninka, central part, the ex-aviation base, industrial zone, Stepovo, and so on. So let's move step by step. First, we're going to start with ex-aviation base. On this video, we see another Russian FPV drone strike. We are using this video just to adjust and confirm the current situation, that the Russians still haven't managed to establish control over this territory, so they're just storming this territory with FPV drones, trying to prepare the foothold for further offensive operation. On this video, a Russian FPV drone strike attacked the Ukrainian infantry and soldiers in that base. On the southern direction, there was something like FPV drone exchange. On this video, we can see how the Ukrainians destroyed abandoned Russian tank. And now this is very interesting. A lot of military experts, a lot of soldiers, I read this post every single day, ask either the Russian and Ukrainian soldiers not to leave abandoned tank with open doors. Always close the doors of tanks, because once again, if a tank has closed, let's say, all these doors on its roof, there are less chances for another party to destroy this or that tank with FPV drone strikes. This is like the episode of probably not very good attitude to materials of Russian army. On the northern direction, we have the video how the Ukrainian armored vehicle left Toninka probably to counterattack the Russians somewhere in Vadiana-Pesky, but the Russians managed to discover the movements of Ukrainian armored vehicle, and they start bombing this armored vehicle and attacking this armored vehicle with FPV drones. As a result of those strikes, first the armored vehicle was tapped, and after that was destroyed with few more strikes. Yet there were no movements from the north to the south. When talking about industrial area, the Russians published the video of FPV drone strike against the Ukrainian positions in Vinogradniki. So I have changed the territory in this area for many times. Some mappers changed the completely territory under Russian control. Then we got updates from the Ukrainian side about their presence. Then we have reports from the ground that Vinogradniki was captured completely, and now we got another video of FPV drone strike. So I have changed the map once again. This part of Vinogradniki currently is under Ukrainian control. So as I understand, the Ukrainians still have possibilities to counterattack the Russians in this area. That there is no normal defense belt from the Russians. They still haven't managed to dig in deeper. So I believe that this is risky territory, and the Russians need to pay more attention to this territory and to prepare their fortifications defense belt better than it is right now. The Russians continue bombardments of the central part of Avdiivka, just regular military routine, trying to destroy the concentration of Ukrainian forces, and that's it. When talking about northern direction, the Russian activity was reduced till zero. There are no more clashes, no more storming operations. The Russians probably counted their losses in this area and took a decision to change the plan because it was like a massacre. Yes, it was a massacre, and this is the most unfavorable front line for the Russians. They had significant losses on this area, and they stopped any activity. They need to create, or they start making some plan, or they try to change their focus, or they try to move their focus to Bakhmut, Artyomovsk, and they try to force the Ukrainians to redeploy some reserves there, and then they will renew their offensive operation here. But for now, no activity, just attempts to dig in deeper and to hold the railways as long as possible, because as soon as Ukrainians understand that the Russians stopped, they will start their own counterattacks. Maybe the Ukrainians have already started doing this, so we'll see. Anyway, the next 48 hours will determine the next situation, the next configuration of the front line on this direction. And now we are moving to Bakhmut Artyomovsk area. We got a lot of updates from this territory. The map has been updated by as you can see, the Russians managed to penetrate the Ukrainian defense belt in Chernobyl's residential area and basically managed almost complete the clearance of this territory. We got a lot of geolocations from the Russian side. We have significant number of Russian infantry who were moving inside of the village from Artyomovsk, Bakhmut. So I think that this configuration of the map is based on the geolocations we have by the time I start making this video. But once again, according to the situation that we receive videos always few days later, I believe that the Russians have already cleared this territory, and probably as a result of clashes that took place today, the day before, the Russians managed already to establish control over this territory. We still haven't received geolocations of this, but I believe that the next few days we're going to receive them, and then we can start talking about the ground operation in Ivanovska, because as I understand, the main target for the Russians during the winter period campaign, at least on Bakhmut Artyomovsk direction, is to establish control over Ivanovsk. At least geolocations and Russian movements are saying something like this: the Russians are moving in this direction, and their main direction is to attack Ivanovska from the southeast. The Russians are moving in direction of Klishchiivka, and they have already established control over this hill. Now they're trying to short the front line between these two directions, between Chernobylets and Klishchiivka, 215.7 hill. And the main purpose of this hill is to secure the flank and not to allow the Ukrainians to counterattack the Russian forces from the south, from Klishchiivka. So because if the Russians haven't established control over 215.7 hill, the Ukrainians could counterattack the Russians and basically to attack Russian offensive forces in their flanks. So now the Ukrainians can't do this because the Hill 215 is under Russian control. The same story we can see on the northern flank. The Russians are moving from Khromovo to the southwest. This is the Russian main directions of movements, and they're moving and they're trying to attack Ivanovska from the northeast. So this is the Russian main direction. And to make this attack successful, first the Russians secured the northern flank in the area of Bogdanovka, of fortifications along the railways, and fortifications in Pitomnik. So the Russians have secured the northern flank, which allow the Russians to block any upcoming Ukrainian counterattacks in this direction. So now the Ukrainians can't counterattack because they will face a very powerful resistance from the Russian side, and every single attack will be repelled. Furthermore, the Russians created another point of pressure in Bogdanovka, and even if the Ukrainians are able to penetrate the Russian defense belt in the vicinity of Popovo forest and the railways, the Russians always have possibilities to attack in direction of Bogdanovka. So that's why the Russians have finished the creation of configuration of the front line. They have secured the southern flank, the Russians have secured the northern flank, and now they're trying to implement the main direction of attack in direction of Ivanovska from the northeast and the southeast, and from the east as well. So this is the main Russian plan, and this is the main battle of 2023 on Bakhmut-Artyomovsk direction. Obviously, the next days we are going to receive more updates, because once again the main forces that involved in this storming operation are the units of Kamerton and special unit Akhmat, the most powerful, the most strong stormtroopers of Russian army. Now we are moving to the north. We got some details from Lyman direction. According to the Ministry of Defense, the Ukrainians lost 185 soldiers and 4 armored vehicles. We talk a lot about this direction, and I was always telling you that we have a significant number of losses from the Ukrainian side, but we don't have any geolocated updates. And today the Russians published the first geolocation. This is a series of attacks, series of explosions, and according to this video, significant number of armored vehicles, tanks, CV-90, Leopards, T-72, T-64, BMP, different types of Western armored vehicles like M113 were destroyed during the clashes that took place during the previous few weeks. And the Russians probably managed to advance further. We don't have the real updates, the real coordinates of Russian progress, but the number of destroyed armored vehicles from the Ukrainian side are terrible, a terrific number. So very difficult to understand the real situation on the ground, but the Russians are moving further. But the Ukrainians also tried to counterattack in direction of Dibrova. For now, we haven't received any updates, but there were some attacks from this area. Now we are moving to Kupyansk direction. The front line has been stabilized on the northern part of Sinkovka. The Russians, for now, are focused to increase and improve their foothold on the northern part. They're trying to attack Sinkovka by sending more and more stormtroopers in the village itself. There is some road that the Russians have for these purposes, but this road is under complete Ukrainian control, and every single day the Russians are sending more and more infantry, and every single day the Ukrainians publish more and more videos of FPV drone strikes, of tank attacks on this area, and the Russians do have some losses. So that's why the Russians took a decision to change their focus, and they also try to improve their positions along the, let's say, the edge part, along the outskirts of the village and along the forest. So basically the Russians are trying to establish control over every single stronghold that located on the bottom of this red line. So the Russians, it's like a vital question for them if they want to complete the battle for Sinkovka successfully. So this is the Russian plan. And if they can do this, if they can proceed further, first of all, they will encircle the Ukrainian positions in the forest, and the Russians will increase the length of the combat contact line with the Ukrainians in Sinkovka, which will give them more chances to survive and to complete the operation successfully. According to the Ministry of Defense, as a result of clashes on Kupyansk area, the Ukrainians lost 60 soldiers, 6 armored vehicles, including 1 tank, and 2 artillery systems. So as you can see, every every single day we're getting worse and worse updates for the Ukrainians. The only area where the Ukrainians probably were successful is the northern part of Avdiivka in direction of Stepovo-Berdichi. But to stop the Russians, they were forced to concentrate everything they have. Every 47th Brigade, 116th, and many other different types of forces. And that also had effect on other front lines. And we see that when talking about every single other city, the Ukrainians are losing the battle for everything. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.